everyone, welcome to Pit Stops To Podium, the RevPartners podcast, where we talk to execs who compete and won, taking their companies from high growth to high scale. My name is Brendan Tollison. I serve as the co-founder and CEO of RevPartners, and I'm delighted to have with me today Collin Mitchell for this episode of Pit Stops To Podium. Welcome, Collin.
Yeah, hey, thanks so much for having me. Excited to dig into this conversation.
Yeah, likewise. I've been a big fan of yours from afar, so it's fun to finally get to connect with you. I was going to say face-to-face, but I don't know if that's really what I should say in a virtual Zoom meeting. But it's fine. It's fun to finally get to talk to you. How about that? And so for those that may not know who Collin is, Collin serves as the VP of Sales at Leadium. And then for a lot of folks, they may know him from this podcast around sales transformation. And so, Collin, what we like to do is just really, as we get to know you, it's just the origin story. How did you get to Leadium? How did you start the podcast? So it gives the necessary context as we get into the big idea later on.
Yeah, I'll keep it fairly short so we can get into, some of the good stuff here. But, just for a little bit of context, I was raised by a single mom, 4 boys. We were pretty much dirt poor, literally, struggled to pay the rent and keep food on the table, and got kicked out of places and lived out of motels, like you name it, grew up on food stamps and government cheese. So, as a young adult, I didn't have a lot of ambitions, didn't really know what I was going to do. Frankly, was a bit of a troublemaker, and then, was kind of starting to get onto the right path and got my first sales job. And, I had to pretty much beg for that opportunity because I wasn't the most responsible young adult. So when I did get that opportunity, I knew I had to make the most out of it. And so I worked my way up to the top, to one of the top reps fairly quickly there. And then, shortly after that, took a VP of sales position at another company where I got some more business acumen and learned how to manage people, which was something I was not great at. And then from there, I've had a few startups. Scaled my first business from 0 to 5 million in 26 months. Started a couple other companies, had a few small exits. And then now I'm over at Leadium as their VP of sales and partner, and also been doing the podcast, like you said, for almost 3 years now.
Well, that's great. I appreciate you sharing a little bit about kind of your past doesn't define you, but it certainly influences you in terms of how you think. And so I appreciate you sharing a little bit about that background. And, as our audience gets to know you a little bit further, I mean, you kind of gave the background, but we do have a tradition is to get to know you outside of work. So what does life look like now? You grew up with 4, you said 4 siblings, or at least 4 in the household. As we kind of talked in the prep, you have a busy household yourself. So what are some of those things that our audience should know about you outside of work?
Yeah, so I live in Los Angeles with my wife and 4 kids. So my son is the eldest. He's 8. And then I have 3 girls, 7, 4, and 15 months. So they keep us very busy. We're a sports family. So outdoors, my wife and I run and swim, and we actually met in a running club together and ran marathons together. And so our kids are very active: soccer, baseball, swimming. So pretty much every day there's activities, some sort of activity or activities going on in our house. And so, and honestly, for where I come from, I couldn't even have dreamed of having a life as good as I do.
That's great. Yeah, I imagine, similar to you, I've got 3, and it's getting ready for summer is an interesting time. So as we record this, I don't know when when that happens, but to your point, I just think disruption is coming. I know we look forward to summer, but it's all like, how do I manage my office space in the midst of the chaos that's about to occur in my household?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, with the kids home, I mean, I have a lot of respect for people that, work from home and, had kids from home, especially when schools were closed and stuff like that, because it is extremely difficult to manage. But summer with 4 kids is a little crazy, but it's also nice to have them home and have a little bit of a break from the day-to-day madness.
Absolutely. And you mentioned sports. Our daughter she played softball for the first time, and she got to the finals of her little playoff team. So like a 3 games this weekend, which I've never been a softball fan, or never experienced softball, I should say. And now I have become a softball fan. It's a great sport for the girls.
Yeah. My daughter's playing softball too, and they're young and they have them pitching, which is interesting.
Yeah, we did. It was a coach pitch that I think that's next year. So I can only imagine what that's like. Trying to get the girls to
Yeah.
start pitching, that just to learn that muscle movement is that's great though. It's a great sport.
Yeah. At this age, as long as they're having fun, that's all that matters.
Exactly. Well, Colin, I appreciate you sharing a little bit about kind of your past and your current. Let's talk. You mentioned what you've done, and so there's, you've had a lot of seats in terms of a founder. You have a VP of sales, and you've also been running a podcast. I think it'll be great for us to park on a little bit is just the podcasting element of what you've done from a professional standpoint, because I think it influences other areas and allows you to have those connections, but ultimately grow as a personal brand, but also for your professional brand. And so I'd love to just understand what caused you to start a podcast, or what was the inspiration for that?
Yeah. So I actually was running one of my companies that I sold a little bit over a year ago, or maybe almost two. Wow, it's been almost 2 years ago. I sold this business, and I went on a podcast for the very first time, and it was pre-pandemic in studio where there was far less podcasts. Most of them, a lot of them were still done in person. And it was with somebody that I had built a business relationship with, prior to in a previous company. They did some marketing and stuff for me, and went on the podcast. Was talking about like work-life balance or whatever, because I was running a couple of companies at the time, and just had a really good time. And knew nothing about podcasting. Frankly, wasn't even a podcast listener at the time, and and his name was Chris. So he was my co-founder at Salescast, which I said, "Hey, I think I want to start a podcast. Like, can you help me?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "What do I need to do?" He said, "You just find interesting people you want to interview, and I'll take care of the rest." And so it made it super easy to just get started. And I was really busy, so I said, "I think I can do like one a month or something." And then a very successful podcaster told me, "Yeah, you can't do that. Like, if you're going to do one a month, like, don't bother." He says, "But there is a way to hack the algorithm and get listed on the Apple charts and be like a top podcast." And I said, "Okay, I'm listening." And he said, "Yeah, you got to release 21 episodes daily." I'm like,
Daily?
Yeah, like 21, like consecutively, like 21 episodes in 21 days, like daily for 3 weeks.
Got it.
Then you'll get listed on the new noteworthy section on the Apple podcast charts, and you'll pick up tons of listeners. Sounded like he knew what he was talking about. He had a successful podcast. So I said, "All right, I'm up for the challenge." Released 21 episodes in 3 weeks, never got listed on the new noteworthy section, but built up that habit and that frequency and like a really scalable way to have a podcast on a high frequency. And initially I was interviewing people that I, wanted to build business relationships with. So it was a little podcast prospecting, way of building relationships and networking with folks. And the one thing that kept coming up is they kept asking me the same exact questions that I asked Chris. "I think I want to start a podcast. How do I get started?" And so I told Chris, I said, "I think we're onto something here. We should help these folks get their podcast started." And that's when we started Salescast. And I grew that business from 0 to million plus in revenue in like 18 months. We had like 85 shows that we produced. And in that time, we used my show as sort of like the testing ground of all the new like strategies and growth tactics to grow shows. And it was a crazy good run. And then I decided to move on and do something else. And Chris still operates that business. Salescast still produces my show. They do incredible work. And just recently, the show passed a pretty huge milestone where we hit like 250K downloads in the last 30 days last month, which was pretty impressive for us.
That's great. Well, I'm sure that was a little demoralizing when you did get 21 straight days and not hit the noteworthy or new, because that's a lot of hard work, and for that not to happen. But kudos to you for persevering.
from thinking I was going to do one a month to doing like 21 in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And then not getting what I was hoping for, I was definitely disappointed. But then I found something even better, right? Which was like we basically out of that, we was born a whole nother business.
Yeah. For those that are saying, that's great. I'm glad you were able to figure it out. Like, I guess maybe let's take a step back too when we talk about podcasting. To your point, there's been a proliferation of podcasts, but if you look at a revenue leader who's listening to this, what's the pitch, or why should they even consider starting their own podcast or trying to get on podcasts? What's the value there for them? It may be a layup question, but I think it's a good. Oftentimes, people feel like there's a hurdle there; they don't understand why.
There is so much value in it. And I mean, one, you're building your brand. We all get that. Okay. But I'm a revenue leader. I need pipeline. If you start a podcast, you can bring anybody on. I mean, it's so much easier to get access to the people you want to build relationships. I mean, look, pipeline, revenue, it's all about building relationships with the right people. So the podcast allows you to open doors that would be more challenging to open and build relationships with people, under a bit of a different, context than just reaching out and asking for a meeting. Are all of them going to do business with you? No. Do you want to be a sleazy, salesperson that says, "Hey, come on my podcast and let me sell you some stuff"? No, but there's somewhere in between there that makes a lot of sense and works extremely well. Two, it works as a marketing engine. So you're putting out content. Look, the B2B buyer is consuming, at least 13 pieces of content before they make a business decision. Do you want to be one of those pieces of content or not? So you can be left out of the conversation, or you can be producing content, around the topics that the people you want to do business with care about most. Now, if we look at guesting on podcasts, that's a little bit more, straightforward. If you go on a podcast, you deliver a good message and you add value, and then you have a good call to action at the end to get people into your world, whether that's, "Hey, come listen to my podcast. Hey, I've got this super cool guide that you might be interested in," or maybe you're a SaaS that offers a free trial or extended trial or something, whatever the case is. Don't just go on podcasts without a plan. Like, you need to have some concise talk tracks. You need to have a good call to action that's going to get people into your world. And you can't show up on there and pretend like it's just one big sales pitch of like, "Come buy my stuff." So with the right strategy, the right targeting, and the right plan, either one can be very effective. I've driven millions of dollars in pipeline from guesting on podcasts and from having my own podcast, and closed, tons of business because of both of those.
Yeah, I love that answer. I mean, to your point, it becomes a more effective way to do prospecting with a value-added offer. And so, who do you want to, like, what persona? Who do you want to talk to, and leveraging a podcast to be that way to create that connection. So for those audiences, okay, I'm convinced that's a good way for me to connect with folks and to get them to a meeting. But gosh, what the heck do I talk about? So, like, how do you think through the content or the structure to make it relevant, informative, entertaining? Because some people may say that's just too intimidating. I don't even want to take that step because I don't know what I'd even do once I got them on a call. So what would be your input or guidance for people on that side?
Yeah, I mean, the real answer is you're not going to figure it all out. So to let that hold you back from getting started is foolish. So what that means is, yeah, there's people who are just super big planners and want to have, like, the next 12 months figured out, but like, that's just unrealistic. Figure out the things that are important that you need to know in order to get started. And then you kind of have to see how it goes. And for some people, that's like a terrible answer. They hate that answer. But ultimately, what are you going to talk about? How are you going to make it interesting? Like, those are things that you're going to have to figure out. I mean, the one thing that I do know is super long podcasts aren't listened to very often. There's some exceptions to the rule, obviously, right? But not everybody who's, listening and maybe wanting to start a podcast is going to be the next Joe Rogan. Like, it's just not. So, like, having these like 20-minute conversations with people, how is it going to be different than every other podcast out there, which is something something that people often ask. And it's going to be different because it's your podcast and the conversations that you're having, the questions that you're asking, and so on. But ultimately, the worst that could happen is nobody listens to your show and you build up a network of awesome people.
I love that feedback. Yeah, to your point, it's don't overthink it, fail forward, learn, and worst case, you've got access to the people you never would have had access to before. And so I think it's a good segue into the last topic, which is, okay, you're using it to prospect, or it could be a reason you're doing it. And then as you learn as you go in terms of what is actually resonating with the market. But as you mentioned, if it is being used as a way to get access, how do you maintain those relationships and using your kind of language of not a sleazy salesperson, but truly treating them as relationships that could lead to that $1 million pipeline that you talked about. So what are some tips, tricks that you've seen be successful in that?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is it's kind of, you sell more by not selling, and there's some tricks that you can do, like running your own like live read commercial ad, like on the podcast. Like if you do that, then people are going to be intrigued. If you have a good like onboarding process and flow, part of that onboarding process and flow could be asking specific questions that are high value information that you wouldn't be able to find out otherwise. And then you can kind of structure the conversation in a way. But look, people are naturally curious. And so if you give them a good experience, if you give them a good experience through, them coming on your podcast, they're naturally going to be curious to know more about you and what it is that you do. And then there's ways that you can continue to add value to these people post recording an episode with them, that makes it easier for them to raise their hand if they're a good fit for what it is that you do.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, look, everything you just said is consistent with our experience of building this podcast. So I had no idea what I was doing. I knew I wanted it as a platform to connect with people and to get access. And we've kind of learned as we've gone. But it has opened doors. And to your point, not all of them turn into long-term business relationships, but they're relationships nonetheless. And some of them work and some of them don't. But that's not the expectation. It's just to build those relationships and connections. So I can speak firsthand to what Collin is saying, that it truly is valuable and would encourage those revenue leaders to take their next step. And Collin, to your point, there always needs to be a next step for a podcast. And if our audience wants to take that next step with you or to learn more from you, where should they go?
Yeah, I mean, best thing to do is honestly, number one, if you're listening to this podcast and you've made it all the way to the end, like write a review so that, this show can reach more listeners just like you. And then second thing you can do is that, if you're looking for a daily sales podcast where we're dropping daily content every single day of the week, that's 10 minutes or less to help transform the way that you sell, you can check out Sales Transformation on whatever, podcast app you're listening to this episode on right now.
That's so good. I love less than 10 minutes. To your point, not everyone's going to be, very few people are going to be Joe Rogan. And so having those practical, actual insights that folks can take and apply into their own respective places, immensely valuable. So Collin, thank you for what you're doing for the profession and for equipping these, revenue leaders to be more successful in their role. Really do appreciate the time and the opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you.